Thanks for coming. I'm Ted Dintersmith. A few years ago, I reached a conclusion that changed my life. And when I shared that conclusion with friends, for 2 or 3 years, they looked at me kind of like I was the person on the street corner with the end of days sign up. They said, this can't be possible. But what I said to them was the following: if our schools don't change profoundly and urgently, it's not clear to me civil society in our country will hold together. Now, I have said that now to 100 different audiences in the last 18 months, and no one has challenged that. We see it. Civil society is fraying. It's fracturing. And I want to explain what led me to that conclusion, because those are the two forces that are behind it. So I spent my career in venture capital. I was with a top-tier firm in Boston, Charles River Ventures. I'm not bragging, but I was good at it. I was ranked as the top-performing venture guy in the country from 1995 to 1999. So when I tell you something about innovation, it's not unlikely that I'm right. And I realized over a period of time that many of the companies we backed, and I love the entrepreneurs we work with, they get up every morning, they're passionate, driven, talented, they want to make the world better. But many of our companies were out to bring massive productivity advances to certain industry areas. And what is a productivity advance for one person is a former job for somebody else. And so if you look today at the 10 largest categories of jobs in our country, each one of those categories, there are 3 to 6 million people employed in those categories, each one has multiple startups targeting productivity advances. When they succeed, and they will, for every 10 jobs that are out there, they will turn into one very different job. I can give you lots of anecdotes of how that's changing, but there are 2 points I want to make about it. First, the advance of automation, the advance of machine intelligence, it would be nice and comforting to think it's tapering off, maybe steady as she goes, but it's exponential. It has been for 5 decades, and it will continue to be exponential. And exponential curves, we all studied them in high school and never really understood them. But the thing that's seducing about exponential curves is at any point on the curve, if you look to your left and right, it looks pretty flat. But when you step back and look at it, what that means is the amount of change and disruption in society in the next decade will be an order of magnitude more than it was in the last decade. An order of magnitude. And so a decade ago, we just launched the smartphone. Think of all the change in our life over the past decade. I promise you, you can't begin to imagine what things will look like 10 years from now. And for instance, we won't have smartphones anymore. That will be totally different. So that disruption is inevitable, it's relentless, and it is totally reshaping society. Second example, which is an anecdote, but I interviewed somebody a few months ago because this would not be a job you would think is on its way out. He was an older man, was dealing with a particularly difficult and aggressive form of cancer. Had all sorts of connections. He was able to get to see world-class oncologists in New York, Boston, and San Francisco. They couldn't figure out what to do. They weren't sure what the cancer was. They weren't sure what the treatment was. What did these world-class oncologists do? They sent all of his files, all of his tests, all of his data to IBM's Watson. They trusted Watson more than they trusted their own judgment. And Watson came back and said, this is what you should do. My last update from him was he was on a good path. But think about that. If artificial intelligence is better than the best oncologist in the world on a very difficult form of cancer, is it better than most oncologists on standard forms of cancer? Is this a great time to be going to medical school to be an oncologist? Probably not. So that's one piece of it that I realized, and I knew that well from my career. The second thing was, initially it started with one school, then it went to several schools, and it got bigger and bigger. But knowing innovation as I do, I have a pretty good idea what skills and character traits will help somebody do well in a world of innovation. And initially with my kids, when they were in young grades, I actually was initially trusting of school, and trust went to questioning, to skepticism, to concern, to alarm, to being appalled. And at first I said, as I put these pieces together and watched what was going on, what they were rewarded for and what they were punished for, at first I said, it's almost as though school wants to drive out of these kids the characteristics they need to succeed in a world of innovation. And then I started meeting people, visiting schools, reading about the history of education. I had to amend that. And I took out the almost as though. So our education model, most of you know this, you wouldn't be at this conference if you didn't. It goes back 125 years. And it was, in fact, thoughtfully put together to prepare young adults for 45 years of routine jobs where they would be rewarded on time-efficient, error-free performance of routine tasks without bringing any creativity to it. And we continue to do that to this day. And so when you put those two things together, you say massive disruption and changes in society and the economy and labor markets, completely different demands for what kids have to be good at, and schools that continue to produce kids and prepare kids for jobs that are no longer there. That struck me as a good-sized problem. And so what I did about it was, you can see up here, I started by saying, how do people change? How do you change minds? And I concluded you don't change with logic or rationale. You don't change with a book. And so I found this great director. We did this film called Most Likely to Succeed. If you haven't seen it, grab me outside. I'll send you a link to it. But I promise you, it's the best film ever done on school. We ran the table on film festivals. We were Sundance, AFI, Tribeca, 28 major film festivals. I turned down all the online offers. We only take it directly to schools so that communities can come together to talk about the future of their school and the future of their kids. We've done 3,500 community screenings to date with this film. And we're going to be doing something come fall that elevates its footprint and its visibility. And so that's been very important. I wrote a book with Tony Wagner. But I did something unusual. So a year ago in September, so last school year, I left home the second week of September. And I traveled nonstop for 9 months. So I was gone second week of September through third week of June. And I wanted to see schools all over the country. And I wanted to do it in the best and most efficient and effective way I could. So I actually hired one of the advanced campaign planning teams from a presidential candidate to plan every visit to these places. I went to all 50 states. I visited 200 schools. I convened 100 community forums. I did 1,000 meetings with different people. I saw so much. And that's what I want to share with you today, because what I saw is this stark and dramatic contrast between most schools and a few schools. So I want to say that again, most and a few. So if you go to most schools, and this was mostly K through 12, although some college visits, most schools, this will sound harsh, I really apologize, but most schools, kids are memorizing something they don't have any interest in, they probably won't remember, and even if they do, they probably will never learn or use. And you just look at that and say, that is a fairly low bar. And you talk to people and you say, this doesn't seem like the right way to prepare kids for the world of innovation. And when you peel back and look at their strategies to improve education, it largely revolves around what we can do to better prepare kids for jobs that no longer exist. So let me say that again. Better prepare kids for jobs that no longer exist. How can we make the existing system more efficient, more productive, better at giving kids no edge in life? And so you look at that, and then you contrast it with what a few schools. So I'll start by talking about most schools, and particularly the biggest single culprit in this. And so let me start with the affluent schools, okay, which we often hold up as our model of success. When you go to the affluent schools, it's not evident in the building what the priority is, but it's evident in every aspect of the ethos. The priority in an affluent school, public school in a suburban neighborhood, a test-driven charter school, an expensive private school, the goal is college. And it's not just some college, it's an elite college. And so if you talk to these kids, if you talk to the guidance counselors, first and foremost, there is not even a scintilla of doubt about whether these kids are going to college. They are all going to college. That's a given. And the question is how elite a college they get into. And what happens is you start to look at this and you say, whoa, this is interesting. And we have this film scene in this film that I did, which says it all, right? The director's talking and interviewing some of the students at a high-powered suburban school in Denver. And he asked them the following question. He says, are you coming to school here? Are you in high school to learn things to satisfy intellectual curiosity and to help you make your world better? Are you here just to get good grades? And these kids look at the camera and they are dumbfounded by this question. Because they can't believe any adult in America thinks a kid goes to high school to learn. Their answer, every single one of them says, the whole goal of high school is to learn how to ace tests. Because if we can ace tests, we can get into a good college. If we get into a good college, that leads to a good job. That is a path in life. You peel that back into the earlier years, and what you see is the following pattern, which is, and many of you may even actually have lived this, that somewhere around 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, kids start to lose interest in school. They start to ask questions like, when am I ever going to use this? What happens in the rich families, the well-educated families? There will be a drumbeat year after year after year of you need to get good grades. If you don't get good grades, you won't get into the right college. If you don't get into the right college, you won't get a good job. You won't have a good life. And so they power those kids through. The first community screening I did with my film was in a high school in California. 1,500 people came. Why did that many people turn out for this film? That school year, the school had 5 student suicides. When did they happen? When SAT test scores came back, when early decision letters came back, when college acceptance letters came back. Now, there's no data that says your life prospects hinge on how elite your college is, but that is the mindset. And it's not a private matter, it's a public issue. Ask a kid in high school if their SAT scores are private or public. They might as well put them up on the school website. Ask a kid if their college process is private or public. Every single adult in that school knows where you're applying and what you've heard. So that's the rich schools, that's their goal, college ready, all in. Then what surprised me maybe most is when I visited low and middle income schools. And I'm going to give you an example, but the example makes a case. Because as I traveled, I often cold called schools. I just would knock on the door and see if somebody would talk to me. I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a place called Mentorship Academy. Looked like a nice, I said, okay, I'll stop here. It's a charter school. I'm agnostic. I think you can pick the type of school. Most of them do a poor job with kids and some do amazing jobs. Mentorship. I open the door and it's the whole first floor is deserted. I'm like shouting, anybody here? I do a search. Is this a school holiday in Louisiana? Finally, an admin comes down and she says, well, it's an unusual day. Let me see if I can find an administrator to talk to you. Gets an administrator. He comes down and talks to me. He explains to me, all the kids are upstairs taking their state mandated test. I said, wow, that's okay. I came at an interesting day. Could I just take a peek? I'd like to see what it looks like. No. In Louisiana, on those days, the only way you can enter the room to observe is if you've taken a 2-day certification process in Louisiana to make sure you understand what it takes to enforce no cheating in these. You need to be on this so that these kids can't use their smartphone to answer questions. These kids can't access resources they will have every single day of their adult life because that would corrupt the test. But this guy talks to me, he's really nice. What is he most proud of with mentorship? Their breakthrough is the following. You cannot graduate from Mentorship Academy without 2 college acceptance letters. So I explained to him how many colleges are desperate to fill beds. It's like not the hardest challenge in America today to get some college as long as you're willing to commit to financial loans to accept you. But that's the message. And what you hear is, and it's totally understandable, if the rich kids are all going to college, of course the poor and the middle income kids should go to college. So everybody's gulping this Kool-Aid. What happens then within schools? Because when you look at it, and this is where it's, I think, so damaging. And again, to give you one specific example, but broaden it. So a year ago, I gave a keynote to 250 college admissions officers. I'm going to give you guys the same challenge. I asked these admissions officers, is there anyone in the room, even one of you, that would prefer a student who chose to take statistics instead of calculus? One. I'm just looking. One person rather have stats instead of calculus. Not one. You can't find a college admissions officer in America today who doesn't want kids to take calculus. So the bad news I had to give these admissions officers was the following. I have spent 2.5 years in a Where's Waldo search trying to find an adult in America who does the low-level mechanics of calculus. One adult. I've been to Boeing, I've been to 3D modeling companies, I've been anywhere and everywhere you think would be logical. All I want is one stinking adult who still does integrals by hand. None. There are none, except for high school calculus teachers. And then I walked them through. I said, just think about statistics, okay? I can't find a company anywhere that's not desperate for kids that know something about data analytics. I mean, statistics is an enormous door opener for career. There's not a company out there. If you knock on the door and say, I can do integration by parts, I know hyperbolic cosine transformations, it would say you're hired. But if you say, I know how to deal with large data sets and how to draw insights from them, you are hired. Okay, career. Can anybody be a responsible citizen in America today without firm knowledge of statistics? I mean, we have seen this in spades. People are fooled by the most crazy of things. Citizenship, really important. Personal decisions. This guy who's dealing with cancer. Can you make important personal decisions apart from who you choose to marry on the basis of something that doesn't hinge on statistics? So I say, isn't it interesting that colleges want kids to do something no one uses instead of something that's really important? And that's calculus, but that goes all the way through. Because what colleges want are kids to do the same thing that let them efficiently rank them. So they don't view K through 12's job as developing human potential. They view K through 12's job as helping them rank human potential. And that's true for college admissions, and that's true for bureaucrats in states like Louisiana that want to see the test results. And so you start to put these pieces together, and you say what happens. And we get these, back to statistics. We'll see these reports, you see them all the time, that say the college degree is still the most effective investment you can make in your kid's future. It's worth $250,000 more earning power, 300, whatever, some big number. What they never say is that when a kid leaves high school today on the college-ready track, their only option is college or working in Chipotle. We've given them no space and support. I mean, just imagine if college admissions officers, instead of looking for calculus, and I ask admissions officers this, it's so interesting to see the reaction. I say, would you value a kid who used their K through 12 years to develop a proficiency that let them have a fulfilling, interesting career path forward? Initially, admissions officers say, sure, that'd be great. That'd be good. Well, wait a minute, let me think about it. And the reason is, like, if you did that with K through 12, suddenly college would become optional. So that's most schools. College ready, go to college. Let's just talk for 1 second about the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Because we're all conditioned to think of college as that guaranteed good job. So look at the math. For every 100 kids who start out at a 4-year college path, 55 graduate in 6 years or fewer. So 45% don't really come out with a degree. Of those that graduate, less than half get jobs that are beyond menial. So slightly over 50% of college graduates end up in jobs that could be done by anybody with just any old background. You work at Starbucks, you work at Enterprise Car and check people in, you do things like that. So this guaranteed good job is actually 1 chance in 4, okay? 1 chance in 4. And that's for the graduates, right? That's not counting so many kids that spend 1 or 2 years at some anonymous college none of us would have heard of because they're told that that's the equivalent of success. That's how you become a real person as you go to a 4-year college. And you get there and the courses are not well taught. You're taking on student loan debt and you drop out. What about that breakage? These kids that leave, doesn't sound like a massive number, but you leave with $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 of student loan debt as a dropout of a college nobody's heard of. Guess what those life prospects look like? It's abysmal. Back to college, and not to pick on them, but we all know the expenses have gone out the roof. So 8% a year annual rate of increase in college expenses over 30 years. So that college expense has gone from my vintage, it was $1,000, $1,500 all in tuition, room, and board for a year. Now you can find places that are $70,000 tuition, room, and board for a year. So the expense is sky high. But the other thing is, how much do kids really learn in college? And if you haven't read Academically Adrift, I don't think, have grounds to enter into any discussion about what the best strategy is in college today. 2 researchers, we spend $400 billion a year on college education. The only longitudinal study of how much kids really learn in college has been done by Richard Aram and Josipha Roxa. And they looked at 25 colleges, 7,000 students, on a reasonable measure of critical analysis, and the gains were slight. And so these colleges, they'll tell you, and they tell me when I talk to them all the time, I know what they're studying doesn't look like it's got real world relevance. Trust me, we're teaching them how to think, except they aren't. So that's most schools. And when we go down that path, we are setting things up for disaster, because if it's bad now, and here's how bad it is now. Federal Reserve Board, recent statistic, of adults in America today, if you give them a surprise out of the blue bill for $400, abscessed tooth, cracked windshield, 47% of adults in America today, the only way they can pay that bill is selling off personal possessions or begging money off of friends or family. And so in that world, as machine intelligence guts even more jobs, where are we headed? That's all, and that's why it's so urgent. And you need to hear that. The good news, and the good news is actually really interesting. I see Dennis Litkey here, because he's one of the entities I write about. When you find schools that have their head screwed on, when they are focused on things that matter, the rate at which kids learn is remarkable. You know, what's so odd about school, right, is that kids learn really fast in the early grades when we're not serious about school. And then as we decide what they have to learn and how they're going to learn it, the learning slows to a crawl. And so as I crossed the country and saw all these examples, I'm writing a new book about this, I saw these common characteristics in schools that were really transforming lives, schools that were producing graduates, whether they go on to college or not, were really understanding things that mattered. They were able to identify problems or opportunities in their community, learn what they needed to learn to accomplish it, work collaboratively with colleagues, with their faculty, with people in the adult community. They were learning how to make a difference in their world. And the four common characteristics, which I shortcut with the acronym PEAK, P-E-A-K, but these characteristics are the exact antithesis of college ready. Purpose. When you ask these kids why they're doing it, they have a really good reason. It's something they're personally curious about. They are doing it because they've identified a way they can make their world better, and they're studying and learning things that do it. Purpose. They're not doing it to please an anonymous 28-year-old college admissions officer. There's something deep and authentic. E, essential skills. And this, I'm a big fan of Ed Leader 21. I don't know if you know that organization, but what do we want our graduates to be good at? Most people, when they go through that process, say critical thinking, creative problem solving, communication, collaboration, some aspects of care. They all start with C. But if you look at schools that say these are our priorities, not taking tests, not jumping through hoops, but being really good at these things, these kids are learning in amazing ways. A, agency. So unbelievably important. We give our kindergarten kids, early grade kids, a lot of discretion in what they learn. As you get higher in school, the discretion, the agency disappears. Kids are conditioned to think all I'm supposed to do in life is jump through hoops. And so when you think about it, one of the quotes I love is from Apple Computer. We've decided that anyone who needs a boss is no longer employable. So think about that. If somebody has to tell you what to do, we don't want to hire you. Yet do we promote agency with our students, or do we erase it? In the places that are really doing amazing things, they promote it, development start early, and kids own and run with their own learning. And then K, knowledge. You know, we actually test kids at the exact least informative point to determine whether they learn something. So they will have crammed for the last 3 days, and then we give them some exam. And if they do pretty well, we assume they know it. There's this anecdote in our film, Lawrenceville Academy. I mean, some of you have heard of it. It's on any list of the top 10 private schools in the country, $63,000 a year, tuition, room, and board. If you live on the East Coast and your kid gets into Lawrenceville, your ship has come in. They gave kids, when they returned in the fall, they re-administered their final exams. They stripped out all the low-level questions they expected kids wouldn't remember over the summer. The average grade for those students went from a B+ to an F. If you cram, if you put in a concerted effort to jam something into short-term memory for an exam, it doesn't stick. The schools that were really ensuring deep knowledge on the part of their students had students do things like teach other students, something we all know. You never learn something as well as when you teach it. Apply it, create, or build with it. So I want to close. One of my most interesting interactions was in Newark, New Jersey. So we did a screening at Eastside High School, one of the schools we mostly point to as a dropout factory. And this kid comes up to me, and he had really challenging circumstances growing up, named Oscar. And the principal filled me in on it. I mean, just the most difficult family circumstances. Oscar said to me, he said, this film was so important to me because what this film showed me is that you can really make a difference in life if you're good at public speaking, and he was quite good at it. Collaboration, he was really good at it. Leadership, really good at it. He said, but I've always done so poorly in school, but this film made me believe I make a difference. But he added, and it was so interesting, he said, you know, we read in our history class how adults in America came together way, way back. It was like the Dark Ages, like Greece or Rome or whatever. And he said, adults came together to put somebody on the moon. He said, do you think adults in America could come together to make our schools great? And I said, Oscar, I sure hope so. But I think that's incumbent on all of us. Because if, in fact, we organize school around what's easy to measure, what satisfied obsolete college admissions criteria, what meets the test, we are going to be sending millions of kids out into a world of hurt. And back to what I said at the beginning, we may well not see civil society survive. If we, in fact, flip it and kids are working passionately on things that make their world better, trust creativity, trust teachers, we have every chance of being the country we want to live in. So I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.